The dark pressed in like a held breath. Kojo Mensah sat with his back against the collapsed tunnel wall and let the weight of the dirt above him settle into his bones. Somewhere overhead, the subsonic thrum of a Thornwall patrol rig rolled across the surface, and the vibration traveled down through 30 feet of soil and broken concrete to hum in his molars. He did not move. Motion was memory, and memory was the thing he had been running from since the morning the sky caught fire. That morning had started with his daughter laughing. She was 7, barefoot in the terrace rows, chasing a lizard between the root vegetable mounds while he checked the irrigation flow. The soil was dark and rich under his nails. The sun was warm on his neck. Then the light changed, a brief, horrible whitening, as if the sky had been peeled back, and the first lance struck the eastern ridge and turned 300 acres of cropland into a sheet of glass. The sound arrived a heartbeat later, a crack that split the world open. He remembered grabbing her. He remembered running. He remembered the heat on his back and the way her small fingers clutched his collar and the impossible silence after the second strike when he looked down and she was no longer breathing. Nothing that made sense. 6 months. 6 months since the Thornwall occupation began, and Kojo had spent every day of it dragging survivors toward the cell because dying alone was pointless, and dying with purpose was the only thing left that felt like prayer. He was a conscript. The designation meant he had no rank, no say, and no future. It also meant he could walk into places that mattered and not walk out. And that was a currency the cell spent carefully. A scraping sound. Kojo's eyes tracked toward the drainpipe entrance without moving his head. Lumi Virtanen crawled out of the darkness on her hands and knees, her breath coming in short, wet gasps. She was small. That was the point. That was why she was still alive at 17. Why Naima used her as courier through the ductwork and maintenance shafts that adults could not navigate. She bit her thumbnail bloody when she was scared, and she was always scared now. The blood was fresh on her lip. She held out the mission log slug. Her hand trembled. Naima wants you. She swallowed. Swallowed again. The old grain silo. Before the second moon sets. Kojo took the slug. The crystal was warm from her skin. How many patrols? 3 on the main road, 2 circling the western blocks. Her voice cracked on circling. I waited under the drainage grate for 40 minutes. Good. You waited. That's what keeps you breathing. Lumi looked at him with something that was not quite gratitude. She was still learning to carry fear without letting it break her, and she was learning fast because she had no choice. None of them had a choice anymore. Above them, the thrum shifted pitch. Kojo put his hand flat on the tunnel floor and felt the rhythm change. The patrol rig was turning, circling back. Thornwall patrol rigs were not machines in any human sense. The occupation used things grown, not built. The rig above them was a mass of interlocked root metal fibers wrapped around a dark energy tap, and it moved across the surface on 6 articulated limbs that drove into the ground like pile drivers. The footfalls came through the earth with a sound like timber splitting under enormous weight. He counted the beats. 1, 2, 3, 4. The interval was steady. Too steady. The rig was not hunting. It was simply moving. And moving things could be avoided if you understood their rhythm. Now, he said. They moved through the drainage channel on their bellies. The channel ran east-west beneath the old township, a concrete artery built during the colonial expansion and forgotten long before the Thornwall arrived. The smell of burnt circuit board and wet soil filled every breath. Kojo led with his elbows, pulling himself forward in short, silent strokes, while Lumi followed close enough that he could feel her breath on his ankles. The patrol rig passed directly overhead. The vibration came up through his sternum and rattled his teeth. He pressed himself flat against the channel floor and reached back to pull Lumi down beside him. The footfalls hammered above them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then faded eastward toward the processing hub. The silence that followed was deeper than any quiet. Clear, Kojo breathed. Go. They crawled another 200 meters before the channel opened into a maintenance junction. From there, the route to the grain silo was a series of blind alleys and collapsed storefronts, and they ran it in silence with the second moon casting long shadows across the broken pavement. The silo rose ahead, a cylinder of stained concrete, its upper level shorn off by a plasma lance strike during the first week of the invasion. The cell met in the sublevel, where the old grain storage bays were dry and deep and impossible to see from the air. Naima Yaqub was waiting in the central bay. She stood with her back to the entrance, tall and deliberate, and the smell of gun oil and crushed herbs reached Kojo before she turned. When she did, her eyes found his and held them. Her voice never needed to rise. It filled the room at any volume. "You're late." Patrol shift changed. Kojo stopped 3 paces from her. "Lumi says you have a plan." Naima stepped aside. On the crate behind her lay a plasma lance. It was a staff of petrified wood half as long as a human. Its surface worked with spiraling grooves that seemed to shift when you looked at them directly. At its core, a viscous amber liquid pulsed with slow, hypnotic light. The weapon hummed, a faint ozone hiss, like rain falling on hot stone. It was still warm. Kojo could feel the heat radiating from 3 feet away. A Thornwall weapon, taken from a dead Thornwall soldier, brought here by someone who had risked everything to carry it. "Toriro took it off a commander in the eastern quarter," Naima said. 3 days ago. The charge was nearly full. We have maybe 40 seconds of continuous use before it drains." 40 seconds is a lot of killing, used right," Kojo said. "It is, and we're going to use it right." Naima spread a hand-drawn map across the crate beside the lance. Ravine 4. The Thornwall run a resource convoy through it every 3 days. Rations, water purifiers, medical stock from the captured colonial stores. 12 rigs, 1 commander. No air cover because the ravine is too narrow. We hit them at the bottleneck, disable the lead rig with the lance, strip the supply trailers, and we're gone before their reinforcements can scramble. Kojo studied the map. The route made sense. The timing would be tight. "How many in the cell now?" "Including you?" 8. 8 people against 12 rigs and a commander. 8 people who know the ground. And the rigs are not the threat, the commander is. The rig operators are logistics cast. They fight like they're reading a manual. Toriro can handle the flank while you and I take the lance up the center. Kojo shook his head. Lumi should not be near this. Lumi made a sound behind him, something between a protest and a wounded animal. He did not turn. "She's 17, he said. "She's a courier. She delivers messages. She does not carry a rifle into a ravine ambush." Naima did not raise her voice. "You're a conscript, Mensah. You don't get a choice. The cell lives because you act. The colony dies because you don't." The words landed. He felt them in his chest like a second heartbeat. He looked at the plasma lance. The amber light pulsed. The ozone hiss filled the silence. And in that light, he saw his daughter's face, the curve of her cheek, the way she had laughed at the lizard in the terrace rose, the impossible stillness of her body after the second strike. The memory came through him like a wave, and when it passed, something had calcified in its wake. He nodded. It was not a decision. It was a door closing. He would raid. He would kill. He would not stop until the ground remembered him, until the soil he had once farmed and the soil that had taken his daughter both bore witness to what he had done. Lumi stepped forward. Her voice was steadier than before. "I can carry the medical stock. I'm fast. You said so yourself." Kojo opened his mouth to answer. A distant concussive thud rolled across the plain. The walls of the silo shivered. Dust sifted down from the cracked concrete above. Naima's expression hardened into something that was not quite anger and not quite grief. "They're ahead of schedule," she said. "They're burning the real settlement. We move tonight." The incident report was still damp with nutrient fluid when Stranglethorn pressed it flat against the bower wall. The vine-woven surface shivered and accepted the membrane, its bioluminescent veins brightening to a soft blue as the data transferred into the root network. He chewed a seed pod slowly, letting the metallic taste of its sap coat his inner fronds. It steadied the mind. Below him, through a gap in the fused lattice, the processing yard churned under floodlights. Bare human feet scraped across metal grating. A guard thorn barked a command in the pulsing clicks of their tongue, and a line of prisoners shuffled forward. Stranglethorn turned from the view and let the bower's light dim. Blue faded to a bruised gray, matching his mood. Okello stood 3 paces back, his thin tunic already dark with sweat at the armpits. The human administrator's hands never stopped moving. plucking at his sleeve, touching his collar, interlacing his fingers. Stranglethorn found the constant motion both repulsive and useful. A creature that could not be still was a creature that could be read. A supply depot in the western hollows, Stranglethorn said. The sounds of their language came out flat and uninflected through his resonant fronds. Raiders breached the perimeter, killed the guard thorn, and took nothing of weight. Rations, one medical kit, the boots from the fallen soldier's feet. Okello blinked. Boots, Commander? The armor sheaths were left untouched. The plasma lance was still warm when the patrol arrived. They passed over a weapon worth a season's ration credits and took foot coverings from a corpse. Stranglethorn turned his crest slightly, a gesture of inquiry among his kind. You have lived among them. Explain. Okello's throat bobbed. It's not... They don't always act on tactical value, Commander. They have stories. Martyr stories. When someone dies fighting, they say the person becomes part of the soil, that their children will sing about them. The boots, they might be a relic, something to carry the memory. Stranglethorn's seed pods tightened along his spine. Memory, he repeated, and the word tasted of rotting vegetation. They trade survival for vapor. You are telling me they risk their lives to collect mementos of the dead. I'm telling you they believe it matters, Commander. Then they're sap-squandering fools. Stranglethorn's crest flushed a brief, hot orange before he stilled it. But fools can still breed, still spread, still clog the soil with their noise. He pulled the next order membrane from the bower wall and pressed it into Okello's chest. The human fumbled, caught it with damp palms. Sector 3. Every settlement, every hide hole, every drainage duct. Round them up. Execute 1 in 10. Let them see that their stories cost more than they can pay. Okello's hands went completely still. It was the first time Stranglethorn had seen the man stop moving in 40-day cycles. The silence stretched, and Stranglethorn filed the hesitation away in the root memory that tracked all potential cracks. Transcribe the order, Stranglethorn said. Now. The hand started moving again, reaching for a stylus. The writing was shaky but legible. Stranglethorn watched the characters form and thought about how a root system dies. It begins at the tips, the smallest feeder tendrils withering first, and only much later does the rot reach the core. He did not think Okello was the core of anything, but the trembling hands were not the behavior of a healthy feeder. A new signal pulsed through the bower wall. Blue light rippled in a staccato pattern that meant a scout transmission. Stranglethorn extended a tendril and drank the data directly. Human cell. Eastern sinkhole. Proximity to the dark energy tap installation, the great crystal spire that drew power from the fabric of local space. The scout's report carried a scent tag of near-certain confirmation. The humans were moving in the old drainage tunnels beneath the sinkhole's southern lip. Stranglethorn felt something then. A sensation that started low in his root ball and rose through his canes, thickening his sap. He labeled it root-deep unease and tried to taste its source. The pattern of attacks had no central stem, no leader node to sever, no single taproot that would starve the rest. The cell in the hills, the cell in the drainage channel, the cell that took boots from a body. They did not coordinate in any way his tactical roots could trace. And now this incursion toward the tap, an installation that would unravel an entire quadrant if breached. The unease passed, but the sap remained thick. Commander? Okello's voice cracked. Stranglethorn pulled back his tendril and activated the hunter-killer squad with a spike of pheromonal intent. He felt the answering readiness from the barracks route, 300 paces distant. The squad would form and move in under a minute. We will wait for them at the objective, he said. They expect Thornwall to chase. They do not expect us to already be there, coiled in the dark. He gestured for Okello to remain and walked toward the bower's outer corridor. The vine walls pulsed as he passed. The air tasted of his own sap and something else. Something that clung to the roof of his sensory fronds like silt. Human sweat. Fear scent. The residue of thousands of prisoners processed in the yard below had worked its way into the very fiber of the bower. It fouled the air even now, after purging cycles, after solvent mists, after everything. Okello followed him without being told. The human's footsteps were soft and terrified. the steps of an animal that knew it walked in the shadow of something larger. Stranglethorn paused at the corridor's end, where the vine walls opened onto a balcony overlooking the yard. The floodlights burned white. Prisoners knelt in lines, hands bound behind their backs with root fiber cord. A guard thorn methodically checked their faces against a recognition membrane. When the purging is complete, Stranglethorn said, we will overplant this world. Every field, every crater, every place where human blood touched the soil. Thornwall cedars will break the ground and claim the nutrients. Nothing that rooted here in your era will root again. He turned his crest toward Okello. The human's face was gray. Your species is a weed, Administrator, and weeds can be pulled. Okello opened his mouth. Whatever he meant to say was swallowed by a sound that cut through the bower like a blade through leaf fiber. An alarm shrieked. The dark energy tap's perimeter had been breached. Stranglethorn's crest flushed a blazing, furious orange. His canes tightened, and his root ball clenched, and the sap in his veins ran hot, with something that was not fear, but was older than fear, and far more primal. The vermin are already there. Kojo ran the plasma lance's green blade along the barrier seam, and the living wall screamed. It was not a sound he would ever forget. The plant matter split and curled back from the heat, edges blackening to ash, and from the wound a thick amber fluid pulsed in gouts. The smell hit him next. Scorched sugar and something meatier beneath. His hands vibrated through the lance's grip. The blade hissed and spat. Beside him, Naima Yaqub counted under her breath, lips moving without sound, and when the gap was wide enough to admit a hunched body, she tapped his shoulder twice. Go! He killed the blade. The barrier kept weeping. They slipped through into air that hummed at the base of the skull. The dark energy tap rose before them, a spire of milky crystal, the height of 12 stacked containers, its surface crawling with slow arcs of violet light. The hum lived in Kojo's molars. It made his fillings ache in a rhythm he could feel but not hear. Pre-dawn mist coiled around the structure's base, pale as bone, and somewhere above them, Lumi Virtanen lay flat on a maintenance catwalk, with a signal mirror clutched in her small fist. Naima moved first. 4 cell fighters followed, their names already dissolving into the mist and the dark. Kojo knew their faces. He had shared water with them in the silo. He could not recall a single name now. The tap's hum pushed everything else out. Nodes, Naima said, and pointed. The power regulation nodes ringed the spire's base like mushrooms on a rotting log. Organic pods of translucent tissue, with dark cores that pulsed in time with the crystal's light. Each one was the size of a human torso. Each one fed the occupation's grid for 100 kilometers. Shaped charges came out of the fighters' packs, discs of pale compound wrapped in oilcloth. Kojo took 4. His hands moved without instruction, muscle memory from a life before the occupation, when he had wired irrigation pumps and rigged solar arrays. Different machines, same precision. He pressed the first charge against a node's underside. The tissue was warm. It gave slightly under his fingers. He did not think about what it would feel like when it ruptured. He moved to the next. A light blinked on the catwalk. 3 short, 1 long. Naima's head came up. How many? Another blink. Then another. Lumi's signal was steady, but the pattern was wrong. Too many flashes, too fast. The child was afraid. Inbound, Kojo said. Too many to count. The fighters stopped moving. One of them, a woman with a burn scar twisting her left forearm, looked at Naima and waited. No one spoke. The tap's hum climbed half a pitch, or maybe that was Kojo's own blood singing in his ears. Lumi, Naima called into the mist. Her voice did not rise. It simply filled the space the way water fills a basin. Come down. The girl descended the ladder in a controlled fall, barely touching the rungs. Her face was white, and her thumbnail was bleeding where she had bitten it to the quick. She landed beside Naima and held out the mission log slug, the thumb-sized crystal catching violet light from the spire. Take it, Naima said. Lumi's hand closed around the slug. I can stay. I can fight. You are the part of us that lives. Naima pulled the girl close, one hand on the back of her head, and for half a second Kojo saw something break in the older woman's face. a crack in the armor of calm. Then it sealed. Go. The data is all that matters. Lumi looked at Kojo. He nodded once. She ran. The mist swallowed her in 3 steps. There was only the sound of small feet on metal grating, then nothing. Kojo pressed the last charge into place and armed it. The timer was set to Naima's signal. He did not know what the signal was. He did not ask. Stranglethorn tasted the air and found it thick with human stink. He rose through the maintenance route in a coil of compressed muscle and thorn cluster hands, his crest flush with orange agitation. Behind him, his hunter-killer squad fanned out through the service channels, 12 bodies moving in pheromonal lockstep, their plasma lances already ignited. The green light painted the root walls in sickly angles. Sweat. Electrical residue from the charges. And fear scent, sharp and unmistakable. The chemical signature of prey that knows it has been cornered. But there was no defensive line. Stranglethorn paused. His crest rippled. The humans should have dug in behind the node cluster, should have established a firing position with cover and crossfire. The logic was simple. Even an infestation fought to survive. Yet the scent was scattered. A presence here, a presence there, no coherent formation. The damage was already done. He could see the shaped charges on the nodes, pale discs that his root sense told him were armed and waiting. Disable them, he commanded through a pheromonal spike that made his squad flinch. But the humans had not waited to be attacked. They had not formed a line. They were simply there, in the mist, doing something that made no tactical sense. One of them, a woman, tall, smelling of gun oil and crushed herbs, was walking toward the spire's base with a small object in her hand. Not a weapon. A trigger. Stranglethorn's crest flared white. Kill her. The first thorn spine took the burn-scarred fighter through the throat. She went down without a sound. The second punched through the meat of Naima's left thigh and pinned her to the deck plating. Kojo was already moving. He hooked his arms under Naima's shoulders and pulled. The spine held. Naima made a noise that was not a scream, a short, controlled exhale through clenched teeth. Her leg was a ruin, but her eyes were clear, and her hand was steady, and in her thumb was the detonator. Make it count, she said. Her voice was flat. No tremor, no plea. She shoved him backward with surprising strength, both palms against his chest, and he stumbled over a node housing and fell hard onto the deck. Naima's thumb pressed down. The charges did not explode. They cracked the containment field, and the field failed. The tap's hum became a shriek that climbed out of the audible range and kept climbing, a pressure in the skull that made Kojo's vision wide out for half a heartbeat. Gravity pulled in 2 directions at once. His stomach lurched sideways. The ground could not decide which way was down, and for a stretched and terrible second Kojo felt himself falling up and down and sideways all at once, suspended in a sphere where distance had become direction and direction had become a lie. The wave hit. It was not fire. Fire would have been a mercy. It was a fold in the geometry of the world, an unraveling of the local space-time that turns solid matter into a suggestion and then a memory. Thornwall troops caught in the radius simply ceased. No flash, no heat. One moment they were there, charging with raised lances, and the next they were smeared across 4 dimensions that should not have touched. Stranglethorn burrowed. Raw instinct, older than his sapience, drove his body into the root metal of the service channel. His limbs clawed downward through soil and stone and screaming crystal. The wave passed over him, and he felt his own structure waver, felt his root logic stutter and reset. And then there was only darkness and the taste of scorched chlorophyll from his own ruptured seed pods. He was alive. He did not understand why. Kojo clawed out of a crater. The facility was half gone. The spire had folded inward like a crushed egg, violet light still pulsing from its broken heart. Debris fell in slow spirals, caught in pockets of residual wrongness, where gravity had not yet decided which way was down. The air stank of ozone and charred plant matter. His ears rang with the ghost of the shriek. In his fist, he clutched Naima's locket. He did not remember taking it. He did not remember crawling out of the ruin. His hands were burned, and his left shoulder sat wrong in its socket, and there was blood in his mouth that tasted of copper and ashes. He knelt in the rubble and looked at the locket, a small brass oval, dented now, still warm from her skin. He did not open it. He did not need to. In the distance, the spire's collapse sent a final pulse racing across the plains, a violet shockwave spreading low and fast, and everything it touched twisted slightly out of true. A tree bent sideways. A rock floated for half a second. The pulse passed over Kojo and made his teeth ache and did not kill him. It would render the area uninhabitable for a generation. He understood that now. Naima had not intended to destroy the tap. She had weaponized its failure state, turned the Thornwall's own infrastructure into a wound that would not close. Victory. It tasted like ozone and dead friends. Somewhere in the mess of broken crystal and folded earth, Stranglethorn roared in order. The sound was not words. It was pure pheromonal rage, a chemical howl that cut through the ringing in Kojo's ears. Above them, beyond the mist and the fading violet light, the Thornwall cruisers in orbit began shifting formation. Lights moved against the dark. Retaliation would not be measured. It would not be strategic. It would be annihilation with a face. Kojo looked at the locket. He looked at the crater behind him. He looked at the sky. He had nothing left to lose but the locket and the ground. And the sky began to change. Rain found a path through the collapsed roof and struck the back of his neck in a steady, cold rhythm. Kojo did not move. He had not moved in what felt like hours, maybe longer. His back against a wall still tacky with old soot, and his hand resting on something brittle under a scattering of plaster dust. The air in the bombed-out school smelled of wet gypsum and iron. The iron was old blood, soaked into the floorboards 3 days ago when the Thornwall hunter-killers swept the eastern sinkhole and found the cell's fallback position. 4 people had not made it out. Naima had not made it out. The rest of them had run through the drainage channels again, carrying nothing but their breath and their terror, and they had ended up here, in a classroom where the children's drawings still clung to the walls. The drawings were smeared black. One of them lay half under his palm, a stick figure family, 6 shapes with oversized heads and lines for arms. One figure had been scratched out with something sharp, a gouge that tore through the charcoal and into the plaster beneath. Kojo's thumb rested in the groove without his having noticed. A hand cracked across his face. The slap turned his head and left a sting that arrived before the sound. Lumi stood over him, breathing hard, her thumbnail a wet red mess where she had gnawed it bloody. Rain had plastered her dark hair to her scalp, and her teeth were chattering, but her eyes were dry and furious. She said, "You don't get to vanish." Kojo blinked. The sting receded into the larger numbness. She shoved a datapad at his chest. The screen was cracked, the glow weak and flickering, but data scrolled in steady lines. Naima's slug, we decoded it. Every risk she took, every node she mapped. It's live now, and the Thornwall have called a void reactor cruiser into low orbit. The term landed in the quiet. A void reactor cruiser. Ships that carried planet killers, powered by dimensional bleed, and cold enough to glass a continent in a single firing cycle. Kojo knew the class. He had seen one in dry dock at the port 3 years ago, before the invasion turned him from a dockhand into a ghost. Lumi's voice splintered. "Say something." "How long?" 17 hours. Maybe less. The orbital window is already closing. Toriro Chikwava came through the sagging doorframe with 4 survivors behind him. They were hollow-eyed, all of them, their clothes still stiff with dried mud from the drainage channels. One of them carried a child's satchel with no child to give it to. Toriro's crooked smile was absent, and the burn-scarred eye that never closed fully looked raw, the lid rimmed red from sleeplessness. He hummed 2 bars of something tuneless, then stopped himself. He knelt beside Kojo and set down a roll of schematics so thin the paper was nearly translucent. The markings on it were dock worker scrawl, crude but precise. "A friend got these out," Toriro murmured. "Died getting them. The cruiser in orbit, it's a Kelvari ship, but the reactor is standard Thornwall growth pattern. Same architecture as the ground-based taps. The cooling conduits run through the primary root core, and if you hit them with a thermal surge at the right cycle phase, they don't fail, they amplify." He paused. His humming hand pressed flat over his thigh. "Cascade failure. The whole ship becomes a bomb, and every Thornwall asset in high orbit goes with it." The schematics showed a branching tangle of conduits around a central nexus. Kojo traced one line with a finger that did not feel like his own. The geometry was familiar. He had loaded coolant regulators onto cargo pallets for 3 seasons. He knew the torque settings, the coupler seals, the particular whistle, a stressed valve made just before it cracked. Lumi crouched on the other side of the schematic. There's a cargo cycle in 4 hours. We hijack a shuttle at the port, use the dock worker transponder codes that came with these plans. The shuttle takes us up. We get aboard. We find the cooling nexus, and we overheat it. Her voice was too fast, the words running into each other. Kojo, you're the only one here who can fly a shuttle. Nobody else has port experience. He said nothing. Toriro leaned forward. The window is real. If that cruiser fires, there's no resistance left to lead. Just ash. Too many people already paid. Kojo's voice came out flat, without inflection, the way a door closes. Naima, the 4 we left in the sinkhole. The dock worker who bled for these papers. I won't spend anyone else. Silence pooled in the classroom. The rain picked up, drumming on the broken roof tiles. Somewhere in the building, a piece of ceiling let go and crashed down 2 rooms away. Nobody flinched. Then a new sound, a crackle of static, thin and alien. One of the hollow-eyed survivors had produced a captured Thornwall.com chip, a sliver of organic crystal no larger than a thumbnail. It vibrated against her palm and began to speak in a voice that was not human. Stranglethorn's voice was a rustle of dry husks shaped into syllables, his words careful and unhurried and utterly without warmth. Humans of the Eastern Resistance, this commander offers parley. Unconditional. Present yourselves at the processing yard's outer gate before the second moon sets, and your surrender will be accepted with full terms. You have my root word. The chip fell silent. Toriro's laugh was short and brutal, more breath than sound. Full terms. He means processing. He means the camps, or worse. The scarred eye twitched. It's a trap. He doesn't want to keep chasing us through drains and sinkholes, so he's offering a clean sweep. Lumi's hands balled into fists against her thighs. Then we use it. Parley's a distraction. We send someone visible, someone obvious. And while Stranglethorn is busy tasting their surrender, the shuttle team slips the port perimeter. She looked at Kojo and did not blink. You already know who that someone has to be. He did. The knowledge had been there for 3 days, maybe longer, sitting in his chest like a stone. He had not let himself name it. Kojo stood. His joints ached from the long stillness, but the pain was information, not complaint. He looked down at the charcoal drawing beneath his hand. The stick figure family. The one figure scratched out so violently the plaster showed through. The child who had made this picture had erased someone. A parent. A sibling. A self. He had seen his daughter do the same thing once. She had drawn their terrace farm and all its workers, and then she had scratched out the sun because it was too hot that day, and she was angry at it. She was 7 years old. She had died in his arms 6 months ago, choking on smoke from a Thornwall plasma lance, and he had not let himself stop moving since because stopping meant remembering, and remembering meant admitting that something inside him had already burned down to embers. The man who sang to his daughter was gone. What walked now was an engine wearing his face. He bent and picked up the torn strip of sheeting Lumi had used to bandage a survivor's arm. The cloth was dirty and frayed, but it was wide enough. He wrapped one end around his fist. Lumi did not try to stop him. Her jaw tightened and her eyes glistened, but she did not cry where anyone could see. She never had. The 17-year-old courier who bit her thumbnail bloody and chattered in the cold stood there and watched him prepare to walk to his death, and the look on her face was not grief. It was something harder, something that would carry a trigger into a reactor chamber and not hesitate. Give me an hour, Kojo said. Long enough for Stranglethorn to fix on me. You take the shuttle team through the drainage channel under Dock 4. The access codes are in the schematics. Toriro opened his mouth. His humming had stopped entirely. Kojo. An hour. That's all I need. He did not say goodbye. Goodbye was a word for people who expected to be remembered. He walked toward the sagging doorframe. His boots crunched on plaster dust and charcoal fragments. The rain outside the school had softened to a fine mist that tasted of salt and grit, and it beaded on his cracked lips as he stepped into the gray light. The torn white cloth rose in his raised hand, fluttering like something surrendering. Behind him, in the shadows of the classroom, Toriro and Lumi slipped the other way. The shuttle team had one window. Kojo walked out into the open, moving toward the Thornwall perimeter, and did not look back. Stranglethorn tasted the human before he saw him. The wind dragged the scent across the plaza. Salt, iron, the flat chemical reek of adrenaline breaking down into exhaustion. His thorn clusters tightened. The human came alone, walking the center of the shattered transitway with no cover and no visible weapon. No armor. No shield rig. The posture was wrong for surrender. The spine was too straight. The shoulders did not slump toward the ground the way beaten things did. It irritated him. The plaza stretched wide and broken between the stumps of collapsed habitation towers. The sky above was red-veined with warning shots from the cruiser, fire streaks that bled slowly into the haze. 40 Thornwall soldiers lined the perimeter in rigid rows, their sap seeping through root metal joints and forming sticky pools on the cracked stone. The air hummed with the cruiser's distant carrier tone, a subsonic pressure that made human teeth ache. Stranglethorn felt it as a tremor in his crest. The human stopped 8 strides from the Thornwall line. He was bleeding from a dozen small cuts, forehead, forearms, knuckles. The wounds had stopped weeping, but not yet scabbed. His eyes were flat and dark. He held his hands at his sides, palms open, fingers loose. Not a gesture of surrender, a gesture of stillness. Stranglethorn's crest flushed orange. He signaled the interpreter forward. Juma Okello stumbled into position at Stranglethorn's flank. The collaborator's tunic was clean. Too clean for a city without running water. His hands moved constantly, pressing against each other, folding, unfolding. When he spoke, his voice came out thin and damp. He says the human population will evacuate. Stranglethorn's thorn clusters clicked. Evacuate. If the Thornwall provides ships, a corridor, they will leave. The human waited. He did not look at Okello. His eyes stayed fixed on Stranglethorn, and there was nothing in them that Stranglethorn's root logic could parse. Not fear, not rage. Something else entirely. Stranglethorn gestured at the sky, at the cruiser painting fire across the clouds. You have nothing to trade, Okello translated. The human listened. The human did not react. Instead, he asked a question. Okello's hands froze mid-fold. His mouth opened, closed. He wants to know why the Thornwall want this world. Stranglethorn's crest went still. The soil is poisoned, Okello continued, his voice shrinking with every word. The air is laced with decay. You can taste it. The water tables are fouled. He asks why you stay. The question landed wrong. It landed like a probe slipping between root plates. Stranglethorn felt something loosen in his thorax, sap surging to fill a space he had not known was there. The answer surfaced before he could choke it. The deep soil composition is unique. The words came out in the open frequency, not encoded, not tactical, just raw, pheromone-laced declaration. Okello's face went pale, and he repeated the words in human speech, and Stranglethorn watched the human's eyes register the information, file it. And that was when the first thread of wrongness pulled taut in Stranglethorn's peripheral awareness. The human had drawn him into argument. The human had made him speak. A Thornwall shuttle lifted off from a ridge 2 kilometers distant. Stranglethorn registered it the way a root registers a shift in soil pressure, below conscious attention. The shuttle was not scheduled. He had not ordered it. No one on the plaza turned to watch it climb. The human's expression changed. His mouth curved upward at the corners, bearing teeth in a configuration Stranglethorn had seen only in anatomical diagrams. A smile. The first smile he had ever witnessed on a human face in person, and it looked like triumph. You'll never understand, the human said, and Okello's translation came out in a whisper. We don't need a leader to fight. We have the ground itself. The cruiser's hum changed pitched. A metallic shriek rolled across the sky, deep and wrong. A sound like root metal tearing. Stranglethorn's crest flared so violently his vision blurred. He looked up. The cruiser's running lights were stuttering, its silhouette listing against the red veins of cloud. The human was still smiling. Stranglethorn screamed the kill order. His thorn clusters spasmed, and 40 soldiers fired in the same breath, darts shredding the air in a black wave. The human fell. Blood spread through the rain puddle beneath him, slow as syrup, threading outward in coils that did not dissolve. But the sky was already breaking open. A secondary explosion lit the cruiser's underbelly. Debris rained outward, slivers of burning hull, fragments of something that had been a stabilizer fin. The ship's hum dropped into a shriek and kept dropping. The air itself seemed to bend. Stranglethorn's second-in-command voxed. The signal cut through the plaza noise the way a root tap draws water, direct and undeniable. The reactor cooling had been compromised. The cascade had begun. Stranglethorn felt it then. Full terror root. The comprehension hit his thorax like a pressure wave, sap surging backward through his channels, disrupting every sense. The parley was not a negotiation. The human had not come to bargain. The human had come to be spent, a volunteer, a distraction timed to the second. His own root logic had been the weapon. His instinct to categorize, to predict, to control. The human had known exactly how a Thornwall commander would read an approaching figure with no weapon and a straight spine. The human had used himself as bait, and the trap was already closing. The smell hit next. A flood of decaying vegetation, his own distress pheromones pouring off his crest in an uncontrolled plume. The soldiers nearest him swayed. One dropped. Above them, the cruiser's silhouette tilted farther. Running lights died. A piece of the hull the size of a hab block sheared away and spun downward, trailing flame. And the sound it made was the sound of the sky being torn open from the inside. Stranglethorn stared at the human's body in the rain puddle, at the blood spreading in slow coils, and he could not stop staring. The human had known. The human had walked into the plaza, knowing. The cruiser's reactor reached cascade threshold. The shriek climbed into a register that cracked stone. Stranglethorn's crest went rigid, his sap flow frozen, and the sky above the occupied world caught fire. Debris fell like burning rain. The service route split under Toriro's crowbar with a sound like snapping femur. Pale fluid gushed, steaming in the cold air, and the corridor ahead convulsed. The ship was dying in pieces. Gravity stuttered. Bulkheads slammed down without warning, sealing compartments against pressure loss, sealing Thornwall crew inside them. Lumi pulled Toriro through the gap before the route could seal itself. His field dressing had soaked through, dark stains spreading across the makeshift bandage. He did not look down at it. "Left branch," he said. His voice was steady. The humming had stopped. She went left. The cruiser's interior was a nightmare of pulsing membranes and crystalline spines that grew from the walls, from the ceiling, from the floor. Light came from everywhere and nowhere, a bioluminescent seep that made shadows crawl in the wrong directions. Her boots slipped on something that might have been mucus or might have been coolant. She did not stop to check. A thorn trap extruded from the wall. It came fast. Barbs the length of her forearm punched out of the membrane in a radial burst, and Toriro was half a step too slow. 3 thorns caught his flank. 2 punched through. The sound he made was not a scream, a sharp exhalation, a grunt locked behind his teeth. He sagged. The barbs held him pinned to the wall like a specimen. "Tariro!" Lumi grabbed his arm. The thorns were anchored deep in the ship's tissue. She could not pull him free. "Don't!" His voice was calm. Calmer than it had been in the drainage channel. Calmer than it had been in the bombed-out school. He reached into his jacket and pressed the data slug into her palm. The crystal was warm from his body. "Override sequence is loaded. Cooling node 27. The courier runs now. I'm not leaving you." "You are." Blood flecked his lips. He smiled. The crooked smile with one eye that never closed fully. "Tell my sister's children. Tell them the sky is clear." Toriro's eyes fixed on something past her shoulder. The humming returned, softer now. 3 notes she did not recognize. Then the exhalation. The soft one. The last one. She ran. The corridor tilted 30 degrees. Gravity had lost its grip in this section, and the ship's organs were failing to compensate. Lumi caught herself on a crystalline spine and felt it flex under her hand. Alive. The whole ship was alive, and it was screaming through every membrane. She dropped through an access sphincter into the reactor sublevel. The void reactor was not a machine. It filled the chamber, a nexus of writhing energy tendrils, silver and violet, anchored in rents that opened onto nothing. The tendrils moved like eels in current, slow and hungry, and where they touched the air, The air wept plasma. The light it bled had no color Lumi could name. It was not blue or white or green. It was the color of a pressure behind the eyes, the color of a toothache deep in the jaw. The cooling conduits glowed orange, past orange, white-hot at the junctions. She could feel the reactor on her skin, cold and hot at once, like pressing her palm to frost on a live wire. The dimensional bleed was already beginning. Distances in the chamber flexed, stretched, folded back on themselves. 10 meters of deck plate might be 2, or it might be 40. She could not trust her eyes. Lumi moved anyway. 1 foot, then the other. The nearest control node was a spiral of root metal growing from the deck. She slammed the slug into the receiving groove. The crystal bonded immediately, fusing with the organic interface. The data packet unspooled. It was not just a code. Naima's voice spoke inside the ship's lattice, her final briefing, her field notes, her goodbyes. Kojo's report on the sinkhole mission, flat and precise, naming the 4 who did not return, the names of the dead. Every cell member who had fallen since the occupation began. The mission log was not a virus. It was a witness, a testimony. And the Thornwall command lattice had no architecture for refusing testimony. The safeties failed in sequence. 1, 2, 3. Lumi was thrown against a bulkhead. The dimensional glare seared through her closed eyelids. She heard the cruiser's death groan, a sound that vibrated in her teeth and her spine, and somewhere deeper than bone. The mission was complete. She did not know if she would survive. She discovered, with a flicker of surprise, that she did not need to. On the surface, Stranglethorn watched the sky come apart. He had dragged himself from the rubble of the plaza. His crest was torn, 3 seed pods ripped from their stalks, orange fluid weeping down his spine. He did not feel the wound. He did not feel anything. The cruiser was a wound in the sky. Debris trails bled across the atmosphere like ink in water, white-hot at the leading edge, dull red at the tail. The dimensional bleed had reached down from orbit. Violet lightning spidered across the cloud layer. Silent at this distance, beautiful in the way infection was beautiful when you looked at it long enough. Okello was pinned beneath a slab of fused stone. His legs were gone. His tunic was no longer clean. "You should have just left," he whispered. Blood bubbled on his lips. They were never going to stop. Stranglethorn looked down at the human, the collaborator, the creature who had made himself useful because usefulness was survival, and survival was the only truth he had left. He crushed Okello's throat with one thorn cluster hand, felt nothing. The human body went slack. The eyes glassed over. Stranglethorn stepped back and turned his face to the sky again. 5 cruisers. 5, burning, their fragments spreading across the orbital plane like a contagion. The humans had poisoned the orbit. They had poisoned the ground, the deep soil composition, the thing he had admitted to, the thread he had pulled. It had led here. There was no victory to claim. There was not even a defeat he could understand. The humans had scattered their leadership, scattered their formations, scattered their lives across the planet like seeds. And seeds did not require a gardener. Seeds required soil. Something moved in the smoke. A shape. Human. Walking toward him through the raining ash and the violet light. Kojo Mensah was bloodied. His jacket was torn open across the chest, and a deep gash ran from temple to jaw. He dragged a plasma lance in one hand, its green ignition unlit, the petrified wood scoring a line in the rubble. He was still alive. Stranglethorn's crest flushed the deepest orange of his life. Root claws dug into the broken stone. He felt something now. He had no word for it. His species had no pheromone for it. The human kept walking. The confrontation was not finished. The beam had pinned him across the thorax. One barrel of his torso was crushed into splintered canes, and sap leaked in slow pulses from the wound. Each drop landed with a small, wet sound in the ash. Stranglethorn's crest flickered orange, erratic, broken, the color his species made when root logic failed. Kojo stood over him, breathing dirt-thick air. The purple glow from the shattered sky painted shadows across the wreckage. Nothing else moved in the plaza. The Thornwall dead lay tangled in their own tendrils. Armor had split under falling debris and the shockwave that tore through the orbital formation. Cruiser fragments still burned overhead, streaks of green fire fading into the haze. The smell of scorched sugar hung everywhere, cloying and wrong. Stranglethorn's translator spat static. Then a voice scraped out, flattened by damage, but still functional. Why? Kojo did not answer. He lowered himself onto a tilted slab of root metal, legs threatening to fold. His hands rested on his thighs, palms up. Dried blood and gray ash caked the creases. He looked at the alien commander, a creature who had ordered decimation and glassing, and felt nothing with a name. Explain the sacrifice. The translator crackled. We sought only the soil. You burned yourselves to deny it. Why? Kojo's throat worked. Dust sifted from his clothes when he shifted. We don't know how to stop. It's not in the ground. The crest pulsed faster. Orange bled into yellow. Root riddle. Your species negotiates. Barters. You could have shared. Could have. Kojo's voice was a dry scrape. He let the silence stretch until the sap drip from the crushed limb slowed to a heartbeat rhythm. First landing, first year. You ever hear that story? The Thornwall had no lids, but the crest dimmed. No. Kojo looked past him, toward the ridge where the colony's original terraces had been. Now it was a smear of contamination. They came here with nothing. 600 souls. The soil was thin. The rains came late. They planted. They prayed. Then the raiders came. The translator hummed, processing. Raiders. Your own species. Human raiders. From a failed outpost, hungry, armed. They wanted half the harvest. Half, or they'd burn the settlement. Kojo's eyes found Stranglethorn's again. The founders didn't negotiate. They walked into their own fields with torches and lit the crop while it stood. Every stalk, every tuber, burned it to the root mass. The crushed limb twitched, a reflexive jerk that sent fresh sap spilling. That is irrational. Starvation. Deprivation of resource. They destroyed themselves to spite a threat. No. Kojo rolled a piece of ash between his fingers. They burned it so the raiders would know there was nothing to take. Not then. Not ever. The children learned the song before they learned to read. The crest went still. Song. Kojo almost smiled. The expression tugged at a face that had forgotten the shape. We are the seed in the burning field. Ash is the promise that never yields. The translator stuttered, failing to find an equivalent for the tonal shift. Sap dripped. The dimensional afterglow deepened, turning the sky from purple to bruised violet. You recite myth to justify collective suicide. The voice box rattled on the final syllable. Genetics do not encode songs. They encode survival. Your behavior is broken. Maybe. Kojo pushed himself upright. His legs held. The motion drew his eye to a fallen soldier a few paces away. Root metal arm twisted back. A plasma lance still clutched in a cluster of thorns. He crossed the rubble and worked the weapon free. The staff was warm. The core inside was already thickening with that viscous green light. Ready. He turned back. Stranglethorn watched him. The crest flickered again. No attempt to free himself. The beam had severed critical vines, and the sap loss was too great. He was already dying, just too stubborn to finish. Kojo understood that kind of stubbornness. The plasma lance ignited. Green fire blazed along its tip, sharp and contained, humming through the grip. Kojo held it low. The blade pointed at the ash. Was it worth it? He asked the air, not the Thornwall. The question hung in the static. The planet was poisoned. Most of the population was dead. The girl Lumi had vanished into a reactor bloom that erased everything in its radius. Naima was gone. Toriro was gone. His daughter's laugh was a memory worn thin in places, and he could no longer remember the exact shade of her eyes, only that they were his eyes, and that he wanted to see them again. The Thornwall would never plant here. The soil would hold their dead and nothing else. That was a victory. He repeated it to himself. That was a victory. Stranglethorn spoke. The translator's tone was something new. Not rage, not contempt, but the flat register of a creature encountering the incomprehensible. I do not understand you. Kojo stepped closer. The plasma blade threw sharp shadows. I know. He drove the lance through the commander's core in a single, clean thrust. Green light flared against the purple sky. The ozone bite hit his nostrils hard and clean. The sap sizzled. The crest flushed brilliant orange, then gray, then nothing. The lance hissed out. Kojo let it fall. He collapsed beside the body, his back pressed against the same beam that pinned the remains. The silence rolled in, the first true quiet in months. No bombardment, no scream of quantum drives tearing atmosphere, no voices, only the thin crackle of static dying in the air and the slow, rhythmic drip of sap winding down. The ash on his forearms had mixed with dried blood into a gritty paste. He rubbed a thumb across it. The texture was familiar, same as the terraced soil after a windstorm, same as the dust on his daughter's tunic after the fields. He closed his eyes. There she was, 7 years old, singing the colony song off-key while she washed her hands in a bucket. She had stumbled on the second line and made up words to cover it, grinning at her own cleverness. He whispered the first verse into the dark. We are the seed in the burning field. Ash is the promise that never yields. The words were enough, not triumph, not peace, just enough to fill the space where she used to be, a keeping place for what had been asked of him. He let his head tilt back. The sky stained itself black. The afterglow faded into a scatter of ordinary stars. He did not move again until dawn found him. Months later, a distant human patrol picked up a looping transmission from the edge of the purple scar on Kerengwe. The signal was weak, stripped bare by atmospheric interference, but it held. A single voice, raw and steady, scraped raw by weather and solitude. This is Colony Hearthwatch. We held. Come reclaim the ground. The patrol commander ordered her comms officer to log the signal and its source. They were deep in survey operations, 2 systems away, and had no mandate for recovery. The officer noted the timestamp. The message had been repeating for 74 cycles without variation, pinging out on a frequency no one was supposed to be using. Should we respond? The officer asked. The commander listened to the playback. The voice on the loop did not sound like someone waiting for an answer. It sounded like someone making a statement of record for whoever came next. She shook her head. Not yet. File it. Fleet needs to know. The signal repeats into the void, unanswered, but it does not stop.